Hello, hello, hello. My name is Dr. Liz Wangare Geshimo, a clinical psychologist based in Kenya. Thank you so much for visiting my channel, Mogekoyo by Ancestry, Understanding Mental Health. So today, I'd want to continue with the topic of trauma, but in the context of our history with colonization. So we are going to try and understand in that time space when the British invaders came and whatever activities they carried out, how is what they did then affecting us today? There's a great historian that said, history is not in the past. And if you're like me, when you studied the topic of history in school, you internalized it as something that you have left behind. But this historian said, history is now. Everything you are right now is as a result of something that took place in the past. For example, I want to assume majority of the people watching this are able to walk. However, how did that journey for walking begin? If you're an African child, most likely between the ages of 6, 7 months, you'd attempted to start walking. And by the months of 9 to 12, you could stand and you could maintain balance and walk by yourself. Whatever age you may be right now, you see, if you hadn't begun that process at that stage, between 7 to 12 months, you wouldn't have the ability to walk. And it goes for everything else, even talking. How did you begin to talk? How did you acquire language? Now, for African babies, that again begins around the same time. When they're beginning to learn to walk, they're also starting to learn to acquire speech. And that's between the ages again of 7 to 12 months. And so your ability again to talk is something that just didn't happen right now. It's something that took time and a process for you to acquire. All these illustrations is trying to get us to get into that space to understand. History is not something in the past. History is present. Everything that you manifest, be it behavior-wise, be it your ways of coping, be it your ways of seeing the world, be it the way of analyzing issues, it's as a result of things you have acquired over time. And that period that has transpired between when you started to learn up to this point is what we talk about history. History is now, it's not in the past. Now, the reason why I chose to talk about our historical experience with colonialism and a collective trauma is because when we look at how we are right now, people talk a lot about mental illness. People talk a lot about, we are maladjusted. People talk a lot about dysfunctionality, be it at home. People are always asking, for example, why do we keep voting for our politicians while we know very well they're not for our good? Why, for example, do we complain about corruption, yet when it comes to the ballot, we still put in these same very people that we are complaining about? What is wrong with that? And the question to ask collectively, what happened to us? Why do we seem to behave in ways that seem to be self-destructive? Why do we seem to behave in ways that seem to be against our best interest? And in order for us to make sense of that, then we must revisit when did we begin to be this way? Has it always been this way? Has this always been our history? Have we always been so dysfunctional? Have we always, behaved in ways that if an outsider was to observe would think these people have a death wish upon themselves? If we start analyzing from now, we won't be able to make sense of anything. Whenever you go to a doctor, what do the doctors usually do? They start by taking a history. And why do they do that? Because they cannot be able to make sense of what is going on with you if they don't have a context to work with. So I hope I have made a good argument for why, if we are to understand our collective trauma, we need to examine what happened during the space of colonialism. Now, I'm just going to say briefly about a few concepts. In order for us to understand what colonialism meant, we must examine the consciousness of those who came to colonize us. Okay? And we must also just take a brief inventory of our ancestors who were the first people to encounter the so-called colonizers. And sometimes I like to refer to them as British invaders. Okay? So, what was the consciousness of the colonizers, British invaders? What we learned in school is that they came on a mission to civilize the savages. They referred to us as savages. And why did they refer to us as such? We must understand that the history of those who came to our lands has been marred by war, as well as conquering lands and dominating. And that's a whole other topic by itself. And therefore, what happened over or across time, first and foremost, amongst themselves, dating back, if you look at the empires, start with the Roman, the popular ones, Roman Empire, okay, come all the way up to the establishment of the Catholic Church, because the Catholic Church is the one that sanctioned slavery. Then all now come up to the Age of Enlightenment in Europe, which is around 1600s, where they say now they're coming out of the Dark Ages. Okay, so if you study that and you see up until the end, they talk of the Age of Enlightenment because at this point it's where they could read and write. That is what then marks that. Okay, so if you look at how they got to that point, and then why they started going to other so-called undiscovered lands, then you will get to understand why, for them, they thought or they came to that consciousness that it is their duty to spread their civilization to other peoples. You would have to study them. Like, remember, we started by saying that to make sense of something or to understand the present, you must understand where did all this begin. Okay, so when these countries, Belgium, Germany, Britain, Portugal, Spain, had a conference, I haven't mentioned all the countries that were present. France was also present, by the way. The Netherlands, the Dutch, because, and again, like I said, you need to understand, prior to the Berlin Conference, they had been going to people's lands, conquering, and it was all for commercial purposes, for economics. So between the year 1883 to 1885, they had a conference at Berlin. And in this conference, they decided to divide the continent of Africa amongst themselves. Why? The goal was to have a piece or a parcel of land which they could be able to exploit for its resources as well as its manpower. And therefore, it's in that conference that it was decided which country was going to take which part of Africa. And from there is when now they started now coming to implement what it is they had decided at the conference. And that's then how come the countries that we are currently as Africans are. It was birthed between that period, 1883 to 1885, at the Berlin Conference. And it was done so arbitrary so that you find that, for example, a country like Somali, you have Somali that is occupied by Italians, you have Somali that is occupied by the French, and you have Somali that is occupied by the British. In Kenya, for example, you have Maasais, and you also have Maasais in Tanzania. So, as a family, for example, you could go to bed today, and then when you wake up tomorrow, part of your family is in a country called Uganda, and another part is in a country called Kenya, for example. That's how it wasn't done in a very clear pattern. It was done so arbitrary. It was just depended with whose interest and what is to be gained by taking which portion of the country. So you can then see, because none of us as Africans were present in that conference, which means these people just sat and came up with an agreement, not putting into consideration that on the ground, these so-called lands that you've decided you're going to apportion to yourselves, there's already people who exist. They have their own systems. They have their own nations. They have been on these lands for centuries. None of that was put into consideration. And this is because, like I've said, if you study the history, this is what they have been doing over a period of time. And in order for them to be able to do that, they must find a way to abstract. They must find a way to justify. And how they justified this is that these people are backwards, these people are savages. They came up with so many narratives, right? But in that conference, when you look at what was the purpose or motivation, it wasn't to civilize anybody. They were coming purely for economic purposes. They were coming purely to extract so that they can advance their civilization. But how do you justify going to a place where people are already in existence, okay, and taking over their resources and extracting what they have? You must come up with a narrative so that you can be able to carry out some of these things. Because what we will find when they came, of course, there was no way Africans were just going to allow somebody to come and just take over their lands. They fought. They resisted. And that is a history that is not taught, okay? And because of that, and there was a lot of bloodshed that went into forming the national states that we are today, how could they justify the bloodshed that was meted on people? They had to come up, that's where the narrative of civilizing came into play. Okay? So, I need for us to be clear. For these countries to be formed, the national states that we are, there was already a world order. The so-called tribes, by the way, the word tribe was something that they came up with, that they used to refer to a group of 500 savage natives. However, we were nations. So for example, we were the Agikoyo nation, there was the Maasai nation, there was the Luo nation, there was the Kamba nation, there was the Somali nation. There was all these so-called tribes were fully functional nations with a strong economic backbone, everything that takes to make a nation work. Okay? There were systems that were in place. And in order for them, because of what they agreed in Berlin, in order for them to carry on that, what it meant is to abstract, act like, no, these people are savages. They know nothing. They were doing nothing. So they collapsed those systems, and because you have created a country called Kenya, then you must then find a way to bring all these people together. And that's when now they created the tribes. Okay, so this is a group of people, we are bringing them together so that we can create this land. Okay, and the purpose, of course, like I said, was to extract what was there. And now you can then see if you have a system that you have been carrying on and it's abruptly stopped and halted, and in such a crude way, with a disregard to your humanity. Because if I am coming to disrupt your way of life without consulting you, it means my view of your humanity, I don't hold it in very high regard. For me to be able to harm you, I must abstract you. I must come up with something to justify my cruelty. But if I view you as a human being, then it will be like I'm doing this to myself, so I won't carry out some of these things. So, collapsing these nations, destroying the system, these are our ancestors. And you see, they had already come up with a way of not just running the society or the nation, but even as families, because Africans, everything begins at home. So from the home, there's already a system that was there. How do you raise children? How do you organize different age groups so that everybody is conscious and aware of what their task is to keep this system going on? So there was a way that had been handed over for generations. And it had grown to that point where now they are starting to expand into a society. And perhaps even to understand why at present, when they're doing government appointments, the first question they ask is, do you have a family? Because in the African psyche, if you can't be able to run a home, you can't be able to lead others. If you can't be able to provide a stable and steady and grounded foundation for your family, then it will be a challenge to do that for a large group of people. And you will see that as Africans, the bigger your family, then they would bestow upon you. Right now we can say coincides with a king. Because the assumption is if you can be able to handle all these many family members, then chances are you can be able also to run a whole society or a community. And so this is something, a system that has devolved. And of course, because different time spaces have different challenges, with every time space, they would add on things that they felt were very important in order to be able to carry on or to hold the society or the community together. Okay? And so here you have someone coming, sitting somewhere, dividing this land, disregarding the order and system that you have put in place, okay, comes and says they have come to civilize you. They have come to give you something that is better than what you have been doing. Basically disrupting something that has been handed over to you. And when they disrupt, you know, they are disregarding a lot of things. They're disregarding a lot of things, okay? And what they are replacing with, they are forgetting that whatever system they are coming to bring for you, it has also evolved over a period of time. And it has evolved in a certain space, and that's why they've come up with certain rules, because they work for that space, they work for that environment. Okay? So for you, in your own environment and in your own space, you have evolved your system in order to be able to fit in the context of the environment that you're growing up in. And these are some of the things that was disregarded. Okay? And so now, with that disruption, because again, now this disruption included dislocating a lot of people from their lands, okay? People who could be able to sustain themselves now find themselves not being able to take care of themselves. And you're having also migrations, because now you have to look for a space where you can be able to earn a living. Now they've introduced other rules and laws, taxes, things that weren't there before. And the organization, because in order then for the world order that we have currently to be put in place, the one that was there had to be collapsed. Okay? And now, note, right now we have the benefit of getting a lot of even materials and the books that these people were writing, so we can be able to see how they were thinking. Our forefathers didn't have that. All they knew is that they went to bed one day, the following day they're waking and their world is collapsing, not being able to understand what's going on. And now, where people were free, where people had the space to be themselves, to advance themselves, where people were able to sustain themselves. In fact, when you read a lot of the accounts of the first so-called anthropologists or missionaries or whatever other name they give themselves, explorers, when you read the accounts, you will see one of the things they would say, and here is the contradiction, because on one hand they're saying these are savages, we need to civilize them. But on the other hand, they're saying these people are so well organized. These people, I have never seen people who are so advanced as far as humanity is concerned. You know, they are so loving, so caring, so genuine, you know. And in order for us, if we are to impose our world order on these people, we will have to find a way to destroy their family structure. Okay? So you see that contradiction. So on one hand, they are saying these are savages, we're going to civilize them. But on the other hand, they're complimenting and saying these people, we can't even match up to them as far as their humaneness and humanity is concerned. Okay? So with this distraction, whereby you're able to sustain yourself, now the African who before was free and able to take care of himself is reduced to surviving. And the brain must now start going into that mode, because it's now no longer a question of let's keep the system, because that system won't work. Okay? So that has shifted. And now it's what do we do in order to make sure that we're able to sustain ourselves? Absence of what we have known, the system, the routines, and that kind of thing. Now this is a new world. What do we do? And now you can see the evolution. While you see we talk about spanking and beating, we say spare the rod, spoil the child. The African never used to beat the child. This is something that came with colonization. We say that, you know, talking harshly and hard. The African, and I'm speaking from what I have read, you look at how they used to take care of their children. They valued children. And they understood that if you want to have a good adult, you must take care of the foundation of this child. They understood the importance of giving a safe environment, loving environment for the child. They understood that. But now, when you've been reduced to survival, what do you think that will do to you? Most of these people now, you've been meted with so much violence. In order for some lands to be taken, in fact, someone somewhere wrote, Central Province is one huge mass grave. It's just because it's things that are not talked about. Okay? You've witnessed your people being murdered, and in such huge numbers. Okay? Now, you have been told that your system of polygamy is wrong. And if you want to be accepted into this system, specifically into the church, you must get rid of some of your wives. And in order to get some of these wives, you know, it's a system. There's bonds. We didn't used to write anything, which means our word was bond. So if you go against and send away some of these women and their children, it means you're going against your word. So there's a lot of betrayals that is happening. Okay? And in fact, around that time is where now we start seeing women now, because you no longer have the covering of the man. And let me specifically speak about Central Kenya. So women now must learn to be able to sometimes even play both roles, you know, the father's role and the mother's role. Protect, be tough. Because sometimes even there's stories that I was reading whereby the men now have to travel to other towns to look for work. So you leave your family, and sometimes they never used to come back. So this woman now has to step up and find a way to take care of her home. So you see that's how even the woman now is evolving. They're having now, where before there was a system and everybody, there was a balance. This is the roles of the man, this is the roles of the woman. You don't have that luxury anymore. So when we talk about historical trauma, because we are a product of the systems that our ancestors now had to adapt for us to survive, okay? And here is the thing. When you look at what they were put through, because we won't go into a lot of details, but you will find that even now, because of trying to look for work, now when the taxation came, and now they're changing their system of economics from the barter trade to now you have to earn money. When they went to work for some of these colonialists or invaders, they were being dehumanized, being insulted, being beaten. My grandmother told me of being beaten in front of her children. So your kids are watching you, you are the authority, and they're seeing you being treated like nothing, being talked to in such a derogatory way. Can you see patterns with some of the parenting styles? Talking down on your children, belittling them, seeing them like they're nothing, beating them. These were things that were not there. But see where they start from. They start emerging because of these new people who have come, and now you're picking some of these traits. Being disrespectful. Here are people who have decided you're not human enough. You're not cultured enough. They're insulting you. What do we do nowadays when you have a disagreement with somebody? Or when you perceive somebody as a competition, what do we normally do? Okay? We go after and start peddling lies, or we start belittling them. Where did all this begin? Okay? And please note, I am not romanticizing a mythical past of the African. I'm not saying they were perfect people. I'm not saying they didn't have problems. What I'm saying is they had a system of making sure they take care of disagreements, they take care of conflicts. And with the introduction of the new system, then they lost a lot of these things. And it was much more humane. We didn't have prisons. And it's not to say we didn't have criminal activity or behaviors. We didn't have policemen. And it's not to say that we didn't have, again, criminality. No. The system, however, was such that it was more of rehabilitating. Why is this person behaving in this way? Can they be redeemed? That is what they did. That is what they did. You can tell a lot about the consciousness of a people by studying their language, by studying also their system. You can tell a lot. Okay? There's a lot of things that, personally studying my mother tongue, we didn't have words for criminality, for example. We didn't have a lot of things that have emerged now. We didn't have words for them. We also didn't have words for a lot of the mental illnesses that we have now. These are things that have emerged since the evolution from the time of colonization. There was one account I was reading where this anthropologist who was trying to find out about suicide in the Agekoyo community. And the person was interviewing were confused. What are you talking about? Because they couldn't understand. Okay? Right? So that it's just to help us see the world we see it right now. How or where did it all begin? Okay? Now that we have talked a little bit about that, and I've tried to also try and tie in some of the things that we are manifesting right now that started from that period. Okay? You see, some of the ways or things now that our parents have handed out to us, this is what we call epigenetics. Because of the trauma that our ancestors went through, these things that they have handed down to us, okay? And they needed to adapt some of these ways in order to survive in that space, right? But we are no longer in that space, yet we still continue with some of these tendencies. For example, let me just refer back to beating our children and the harshness and the, sometimes talking with so much anger and bitterness, okay? And not regulating yourself. You see, these are some of the things, because they were going through this in that space. They manifested these things, and it was okay because they needed that to survive, right? But we're no longer under the same conditions. But why do we do some of these things? And I would like to ask you who is watching this, can you be able to examine yourself and look at what are some behaviors, some thought patterns that you have, and ask yourself, why? If this is something you learned from your parents, that's fine. If you can be able to go and sit down and talk with your parents and have a conversation and try and understand, why are you this way? That would be good. But if not, still, ask yourself, could this have emerged at that period when they were trying to survive and they needed it then now? But what purpose is it serving right now? My grandmother, when she's talking about, even giving stories about the Mau Mau War, sometimes she goes and starts whispering. Why? Because in that period, you needed to be very careful. You can't talk some of these things loudly, okay? And you find that some of her children, sometimes these things they talk and they start whispering. Why? I want for us to have an honest self-examination. I want for us to look at especially those things that can be called as maladjusted. You know they are not right, they are wrong. Examine that and see, are these things that my ancestors acquired and I am continuing them, but they are not necessary right now because they don't serve any purpose. I'm not in that space. And therefore, I need to let go of them. Because in this space, if I continue with some of these patterns, all it does is just destroy me. And it's not just destroying you, but destroying other people. And most if you're a parent, of course, this is something you will hand over to your children. For example, let's talk about, as I conclude, how we talk about sex, for example. Have we studied to see how our ancestors dealt with this topic? Because my reading has led me to realize they were very open and very free with regards to this topic. So, in the current society, and more so, my experience here in Kenya, you have two groups. There is the extreme one who says, do whatever, as long as the people involved there is consent. You know, it's as if to say it's something that you don't need to have boundaries and regulate yourself. Then you have this other group that says this is wrong. You should be very careful. You shouldn't engage in it, you know, and it's sort of like trying to make it, you know, to shroud it with all this mystery and make it look like it's a no-go topic, no-go place. In fact, rarely with my peers have I met somebody who learned about sex and what it is, and in a correct way from their homes. For the most part, it was experimentation, others through pornography, and others, you know, through talking with their peers, what they share with their peers. Okay? And so you find that because of that, and it's something that a lot of people have engaged in it in such a self-destructive manner. But when you look at how our ancestors handled this issue, they understood. When you become a teenager, these changes that they may not have had the names that we have now, we call hormones and things like that, but I'm sure they had their own way of understanding. But you can see they understood when you get to teenagehood, there's something that changes in your consciousness. There's something that is awakened. There is a desire, okay? And there has to be a realistic way of dealing with this energy. And in a way that doesn't, you're not repressing because that doesn't work, or you're not acting in a way that you have no self-control. They found a balance in how they taught that. You know, how do you express this? How do you release this energy in a respectful way as a boy and as a girl? Because both of us are sexual beings, right? And this is something that was lost. And now you have so many stories of girls feeling objectified, okay? And boys also not knowing how to deal with this. And now by the even addiction to masturbation is not just a boys thing, because I've encountered both boys and girls. It's both. And people feeling frustrated, and people feeling, I can't control myself. Me, when I feel this thing, I must act on it, you see? But it's because this is something when you should have been taught how to channel, how to deal with it. It was not done properly. And we could dissect so many other issues in the society that are that way. So when I talk about historical trauma, I need for us to understand what happened to us and why we are dysfunctional. I need for us to look at it from that context. Most of the things that we exhibit now, less than 100 years ago, were not problems. And more importantly, it's for us, it's a call to us, okay, to understand that, yes, we have been handed some of these things from our ancestors who were harmed. However, we can stop perpetuating some things that are not for our good. We can stop it. We are the adults. We can stop it. It's within our powers. And I know there's a lot of competing things, and I know there's a lot of things that we are dealing with. However, I need for us to understand what happened to us, what happened to our ancestors is wrong, but we have within us the capacity and the power to change the course of some things that are destructive and not working for us. We can't go back to the past and undo, but they fought and they acquired some of these patterns in order for us to be here today to survive. And we are here. We are here. And so we have the capacity to correct some things that don't work for us. I know today I've taken a bit of time, but I felt this is something that I needed to address and talk about. And I hope I've given you a number of reflection points. Thank you so much for listening.